Okay, excellent. All right, we're back for good now. So welcome, everybody. For those that are joining us when this is recorded and for those that are with us currently. Today represents basically the capstone talk on the text, Incidents of the Life of a Slave Girl. I'm joined with Dr. Christopher Nelson. He is the Dean of Liberal Arts. And so we're going to explore the pronounced Christian themes in this text. And it should be a pretty interesting talk. And I've got some things to at least explore before we get into the text. But before we do, I think it'd be instructive just to define the term Christianity, how it's presented itself philosophically, given your background in philosophy, and what basically is the purpose of this two millennial institution for human beings that are attracted to it.
Okay. And how long did you say we have?
We've got 2 hours, so try to wrap this talk up in about 5 minutes.
Will do.
No, take your time.
And you and I have talked about this before, but it occurred to me as I was thinking about, gearing up for this talk, if I was a grad student studying religious studies or theology, grad school, I could come to a dissertation director and say, in my dissertation, I want to answer the question, what is Christianity? And any sober dissertation advisor would say, you're going to want to narrow that down significantly. So yeah, I'm going to cast a wide net and then try and get us to some type of kernel of consensus that we can work with moving forward. But yeah, throughout the history of Christianity, even at its earliest stages, this was a matter of some dispute. It has something to do with that Jesus guy, but how should we view him? Hundreds of years in, the Roman Catholic Church has some pretty universal success in galvanizing an entire movement. It's codified. Right around, I think it's the 11th century, we get the famous schism between the Western Church in Rome and the Eastern Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church. I guess inspired by that possibility, a few hundred later, we get Martin Luther and his Reformation further north in Europe, the Protestant Reformation, which then immediately issues in some further splintering within the Protestant, what was the Protestant or Lutheran denomination, to where now you can have probably hundreds of different versions or denominations of Christianity. Lutheran, Calvinist, Wesleyan, Baptist.
For those studying history, who were taking a survey course in History 13.0, and we scratched the surface, but once Britain is colonizing the Americas, it is just a splattering of these sects of Christian faith, and all sorts of denominations.
And for all the good that it may have issued in, the Protestant Reformation really making some heavy charges against the institution of Roman Catholic Christianity. And some of their complaints were probably valid, but I think the chief worry from the other side of the table is, as soon as we allow something like an unmediated relationship with God, you don't need the church anymore in the way, you don't need the priest interceding on your behalf, you don't need somebody reading the Bible to you, you read it on your own. The writing was sort of on the wall that eventually, I don't know if we're there yet, but somewhere down the road, we'll get to the point where it is so fractured, so splintered, that basically what Christianity is up to the conscience of each individual. At which point, a philosopher like Ludwig Wittgenstein would say, this is the old private language problem. If something like Christianity means something different to each individual, the concept of Christianity ceases to have any currency or any meaning.
Yeah,
I mean, through it all, if there is, a common denominator, we're all agreed, every stripe and weird version of Christianity, it has something to do with the Jesus Christ guy. And it's right there in the name.
Yes.
And the perpetual dispute seems to revolve, at the most basic level, seems to revolve around, well, what is it about that guy? Is it who or what he was? Is it what he did? Or is it what he said? And most denominations would say it's some combination of all three, and all three make the others more important. We listen to what he said because of who he was. What he did was more important because of what he was.
It's a matter of emphasis.
Yeah, but the basic question seems to be, do we relate to this Jesus person primarily as a redeemer or as a prototype? Is it, Jesus is the one who has come to save us, through the power of his atoning death? Or is Jesus the role model for how to achieve salvation?
Okay.
So yeah, do we relate to him as savior or as teacher?
Okay.
And you'll have some sides that'll answer the one, not the other. Most sides will say some combination of the two.
Yeah. And given probably the subject of the book, Harriet Jacobs, being a Protestant, I would assume she is.
For what we can tell.
Yeah. I'm assuming that the prototype of Jesus is the paradigm of her spiritual beliefs. And it's pretty clear in her writings that she doesn't come out and say, this is what Jesus would do, this is not Jesus would do, but she's looking at people's character and going, not Christian,
Right.
Christian. Right.
But we do get shades of both of those aspects, because we will also get her, often enough, referencing, and her grandmother does this as well. It is Jesus who will save us. We have faith in the Lord, whose church is up above. But yeah, I think you're right on point. More often than not, it's sort of a bare bones. This guy was perhaps uniquely important in the history of spiritual teachers, maybe more than that. And what he lived and what he taught, which it's always nice when those two things coincide.
Yes.
Seem to be, in a Christianity for dummies kind of way, practice love and caring for your neighbor. What you would have people do to you, do unto others. Care for the least fortunate among you. See somebody hungry, feed them. They're thirsty, give them something to drink. Sick, tend to them. They're in bondage, visit them.
So there's an element of prescription in Christian
Yes.
doctrine.
Yes.
This is what you need to do.
You should be, because of the nature of the human condition and its relationship to the divine, which we could talk about ad nauseum.
Mhm.
But because of the nature of that relationship, there's a moral prescription. Here's how one ought to behave in light of that situation.
Okay, excellent. Now, the other thing I think would be informative, you have a philosophy background, you have a doctorate in it, you've studied Kierkegaard, and you also let me know that you studied Master Eckhart as well.
Yeah.
So with that said, I know when I'm picking up this book, it basically allows me to microscope in from a survey course. Survey course is telescoping out, and it's just basically saying this happened, these events are connected, but you're never really going deep. This gives us the opportunity to go, what did it look like during the early antebellum, the late antebellum, Missouri Compromise, Nat Turner's Rebellion, the Compromise of 1850? What did it look like for real people who are living real lives, who are enduring the horrors of slavery, for those that are profiting from the horrors of slavery? So that's the utility I get from this book. But as a philosopher, when you're picking up a book like this, how are you approaching it?
And I couldn't answer for being a philosopher in general, because I came to this book because this kind of thing was happening. I know we selected it as the Common Reading Program book. You and I had talked about, what might we talk about in a context like this. So I was going in with sort of a lens for ferreting out the Christian or pseudo-Christian elements in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think my approach to it is sort of analogous to yours, that we're telescoping in. Whereas, in the history of religions, or in theology or philosophy of religion, we tend to focus on, what's on the page. How does this work in theory? Whereas what we're getting here is some nice snippets and insights into, this is how those beliefs or those doctrines are translated into practice. That this is what it means to live according to that. I think we get a few different versions of that. Here are some very charitable, benevolent, admirable ways of translating doctrine into practice. Here are some really nefarious ways of taking that same doctrine and translating it into some horrific practices. And then even here's some ways of paying lip service to the doctrine and living in a way that would suggest you're completely oblivious to what that doctrine says. And I think we get shades of all those three in contemporary society.
Mm-hmm.
We probably had shades of those three from time immemorial.
Yeah. It's I remember you basically explaining Kierkegaard to me, and his summation of this religion is, and he was devoutly Christian. So this, I mean, no disrespect to anybody who is immersed in this faith, but this is a crazy religion. What did he mean by that? If I have that accurate?
Yeah, well, and you get that more in the works, in the creative works he was authoring under various pseudonyms.
Okay.
He was sort of highlighting against this backdrop of an over-rationalizing culture, epitomized in kind of German idealistic
which Protestants
philosophy.
are.
Yeah, we can make sense of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And against that, Kierkegaard is very creatively saying, you can't make sense of this. he's God and he's man, and he's God and he suffers and dies for our sins, and that somehow saves us from what? Sin that we had even before we committed sins. None of this makes any sense. You approach it with the organ of faith, not with reason. But on the very other flip side, under the works he'd authored under his own name, he would actually propose, it's not really that difficult to understand what it's asking of you.
Be cool.
Yeah, be nice to each other.
Not too difficult. But the paradox is in real life, when you're dealing with contending interests, primarily your own, it is very difficult.
Yeah.
So it's easy on paper, but in practice, when you're trying to mitigate your interest with other people's interest, oftentimes you're going to say, my interests come first. And that's where I think we all get in trouble.
Yeah, and I think that's where he would say, yeah, easy to understand. And Kierkegaard sometimes personifies the gospel, saying it only wants to be understood. It's trying to be understood. It's not trying to be complicated or profound, but it wants to be put into practice. And that's exactly where the difficulties arise. And I think Kierkegaard would say this is probably a prime signal of the nature of sin, that we understand the message, love other people, care for them the way you'd want to be cared for. If you see somebody suffering, help them out. Easy to understand, but there's something in us that oftentimes makes it very, very hard to act that way, which suggests the concept of sin is there's something very wrong with us at some level, at times, if you want to soften it.
Okay. Yeah. And certainly I think this book can give credence to that idea that there is something very wrong with us, right? And again, we're dealing with real people, and this is the value of this book. This is basically an expose on what happened. We also get from this is unique, and we are getting a woman's perspective, an enslaved woman's perspective, which in the pantheon of slave narratives, to my knowledge, is really the only one. And so we get a unique perspective, and Harriet Jacobs really makes that known, that slavery is bad for everybody, but when it comes to women,
it's a special kind of bad.
It's a special kind of bad with the sexual dimension that comes with it when you have people who have absolute power over their property, human beings. We have a chat. Okay. The thing I would like to open up this before we get into the text is to basically, from 3 or 4 readings of this book this year, I've come basically to the conclusion of, we strip away the variables, the history, the people, and really look at what is being said here. We're dealing with, in the context of Christianity, spiritual warfare, right? We have, and we could be very reductive in that, and basically saying this is good versus evil. But to be specific about it, I would say what we're dealing with here, and almost to get I'm getting out of the bounds of my limited expertise in this, but psychology, we're dealing with ego versus love, right? We're dealing with people who, all people are trying to make sense of this, right? Everything that confronts us, that we are engaged with, we deeply want to avoid nihilism. Just us milling around, putting food into our body for energy, making mouth noises, procreating, brutalizing each other. You strip away the meaning of the words that we're saying, and it's just animals acting like other animals, doing their thing, right? But with the profound consciousness that human people, we have meta awareness, right? I think that's what distinguishes us from any other animal on this planet, as far as we know. We have the understanding that we're going to die, and not only are we going to die, unless you just are fortunate to get hit over the head and no fuss about it,
it's going to suck.
It's going to suck profoundly. It does not end well for anybody. Yeah. And so we're aware of that, and we're terrified. And so we conclude that we have a limited time on this planet, and we need to make our mark. And so we imbue meaning into this world through the ego. What is in this for me? And everything that we imbue meaning is focused on the me. Me. And so if I need to trample over anybody that gets in the way of that mandate of trying to make sense of this, to try to bring purpose to this world, so be it, right? And as cruel as I need to be, I will be that cruel. Versus love, right? And this is where I think Christianity becomes an insane religion, because it is usually, almost always, counter to the ego. And at great expense to the person who is deeply devoted to love, right? And, if I'm not immersed in Christian doctrine to any great extent, but in my limited readings of the Bible, I constantly see the theme of God is love, God is love, God is love. And so when you act on that, you are often going to have to compromise your own interests at great expense. And you are being vulnerable by definition if you are leaning into love. And people can take advantage of you. People can hurt you. People can see you as gullible, as not really getting it, right? You're just a freaking hippie, right? And with all this peace and love. Where what we see in this book is nothing, what we're talking about here is something very powerful. We see somebody who is definitely willing to take on a great expense to their personal interests. Just highlighting the pivotal moment of this book, she was willing to hide for 7 years alone in a garret of a shed in a space no bigger than your average classroom desk, slanted, right? So the fact that she is able to maintain her sanity and some degree of health after that, although it was profoundly affecting, her health was profoundly affected, we see an example of somebody within the spiritual warfare that is very much committed to the prototype of Jesus. What would Jesus do in this? He would be committed to love, and the foundation of that love would come through him. And the attributes of that love would bring in people that would be helpful to you, who also get it, who are also exercising the so-called way, as the early church was referred to, as opposed again to people immersed in ego, people who are just out to aggrandize themselves materially through wealth, power, sex, the gamut of the material world, are willing to do whatever it takes to maintain that power, because that's all they have. And we see examples of people who are terrified at their deathbeds, right? We have this guy who is on his deathbed, and she doesn't go into details. Obviously, she wasn't able to get in his head, but he is basically saying, he said, I am going to hell, bury my money with me. And then what follows is you had grave rock. It was rumored that, his money was buried with him. So people are trying to rob his grave to get the money. And I think on the third time, the buzzards got a hold of him and his body was consumed by these vultures, right? And so here we have an example of somebody who on his deathbed wasn't able to, was probably living in profound regret. And you hear of people, and I'm not one of these, I would love to get to that point, but you hear people say, I have no fear of death. And which at first glance, you're like, you're full of it. Of course you're afraid of death. But it does make a lot of sense that if somebody is leaning into love at every step of the way, in a very seamless way, in a very easy way, despite the difficulties of the day-to-day, the practical elements of it, they can go to their deathbeds with zero regrets, because literally leaning into love, there are no mistakes.
And there would probably involve something that I would somewhat clumsily call kind of a recalibration of the significance of self. So I like the metaphor you reached for. The aggrandizement of self is really about me making my mark.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll one up you. Not only will I be cruel and trample over people if I need to in order to make my mark, there's a kind of, I don't know, I mean, there's a kind of deliciousness in making one's mark in that way. If I can help you, hey, maybe you'll remember Chris Nelson helped me out. Okay, I've made a little mark. If I can make you suffer, if I can exercise cruelty, that's power that I'm feeling.
Real power in that.
Yeah,
at the material level.
Obvious. I don't know if I want to call it real, but it's obviously it's palpable power. Whereas the alternative, in terms of leaning into love, would be I'm not about in the first place making my mark, but somehow becoming the marker, the vehicle through which love is poured into and through the world.
Wow. So I'll accept that one up.
You embrace that, and then the idea that this marker might cease to exist in its current form is far less important than the fact that love keeps flowing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're plugged into this energy, whatever it is, and it's tangible. It's something you can actually feel. It's not something that you're just creating in your mind. It's, you can see it in a baby laughing, a dog getting excited because you came home, your wife embracing you.
The kind of moments where I think you and I would agree, you experience a kind of, in hindsight, you realize you experience a kind of loss of self, disconnection from self.
Yes.
The connection is there, the love is there, and the you that's experiencing it you can only sort of dig that out in hindsight. Like, oh yeah, that was me involved in that. But in the moment, it was just that.
Because if you are experiencing the me, then you've tripped it up because you're going, oh, I'm making this baby laugh.
Connection severed.
Yeah, because I want that juice, right? I want to feel.
Look at me make the baby.
Yeah,
laugh.
Everybody's looking at me making the baby laugh, and they're thinking, wow, he has a real way with babies. Isn't that guy a great guy?
Just missed it.
Yeah, you missed it. Right. It's got to be there has to be really no self-incentive involved, which is, especially in the context of our time, capitalism, baby, right? How does one do that? Well, we have an example of somebody who profoundly did that. So I think our avenue through this is I've got a whole bunch of dog ears here of quotes throughout this text, centering on any kind of Christian theme in this book. So,
and we didn't compare notes, so hopefully we didn't pick the same 5.
Yeah, I don't think so. I did peek into your office window the other day and was watching you as you were taking notes. So I got that up on you today. But other than that, no. So why don't you do the opening salvo here and get us going?
Yeah, the first passage. And I'll tell you how this came about. After my first passage to this book, preparing for the first time we had this talk, I sort of went through and meticulously identified, every overt reference to someone's being or not being a Christian, and then sort of started to categorize them and thematize them. And these are pro this person, these are con that person. This is a good example. That's a bad example. The grandma, of course, being ambivalent throughout the whole thing.
Yes.
But then I decided there was a handful of them that I thought were especially interesting, and they aren't always major characters. So the first one I wanted to pick up on is it's in chapter 1. It's page 6 in my book, the real page 6.
But I'm on page 9.
Probably the last page of that book. It's the last paragraph in that, or the next to last paragraph in that chapter, and this is her talking about her first mistress. Now, it was it's hard to find the right words, but you might want to say a good mistress. Relatively speaking, a nice mistress.
Although she's ambivalent about that.
Well, she's ambivalent at the end because, this is the mistress towards the end of her life. After a brief period of suspense, the will of my mistress was read. And at this point, Harriet thought, well, when she dies, she's gonna free us from being slaves.
Yeah.
She's our owner. Once she's dead, she's gonna say, no more owners for you. So that's what we're waiting for. And we learned that she had bequeathed me to her sister's daughter, a child of 5 years old. So vanished our hopes. My mistress had taught me the precepts of God's word. Quote, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Quote, whatsoever ye would that men should do unto you, do ye even so unto them. End quote. But I was her slave, and I suppose she did not recognize me as her neighbor. I would give much to blot out from my memory that one great wrong. As a child, I loved my mistress, and looking back on the happy days I spent with her, I try to think with less bitterness of this act of injustice. While I was with her, she taught me how to read and spell, and apparently to read and spell scripture.
Yes. Well, that would be the intent.
And for this privilege, which so rarely falls to the lot of slaves, I bless her memory. And yeah, and of course, the salient piece that my mind is drawn immediately to is, you know, she had taught me, love your neighbor as yourself, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. But I was her slave, and I suppose she did not recognize me as her neighbor. And I think you can hear that in a couple of ways. I mean, I think that after the first pass, especially the way you and I are prone to read things, you can hear this is really snarky,
Yeah.
right? She taught me love the neighbor.
I guess I'm not her neighbor.
Guess I'm not her neighbor.
That's the voice I have attributed to her.
And yeah, and Harriet does have that kind of capability in her, this really wicked, subtle sense of humor. But I think you can also hear it in a really, really tragic way. You know, she taught me to love the neighbor, that I was her slave. So I honestly suppose she honestly didn't look at me and see, oh, that's a neighbor. That she saw something else, maybe through no fault of her own. That's when things get sort of doubly tragic in this kind of situation. She couldn't see me she couldn't be a Christian to me because she couldn't recognize me as a neighbor.
Yeah. And this is, one, it's just perplexing. Luckily, and I probably fall short on this, but I was taught and raised not to do that, not to thing people. And certainly in the context of my time, especially being a white male, this is part of the running tape in our heads that we are dealing with as individuals, as a greater society, that is manifest in politics, culture, whatnot, right? But I think I just want to pause here and go, how to, and it does seem like this woman is unconscious of it, but it is a little difficult to give her this graciousness that Harriet is able to as a reader, going, how did she not recognize her as a child, as a living, as a child of God, who needed to be freed?
Which is also interesting, because if not recognized as a child of God, what business does she have reading scripture?
Yes.
Why would you teach that? I think that at the most charitable reading has some deep cognitive dissonance going on in the mistress.
Yes, absolutely. And this probably gets to the greater theme of this book. So listen up, students. Hypocrisy, right? She is going to be pointing hypocrite when she's basically saying this person's not very Christian. It's a hypocrite, and she'll be very poignant about that, and spell it out quite blatantly. And other times she doesn't. But what we're dealing with here is this blatant hypocrisy that people are immersed in, again, because it's a society, especially American society, and really around this time, we're dealing with the antebellum. Really is the interim between the first industrial revolution and the second industrial revolution. And it is exponentially upticking this thing in us that is always looking out for me. Now you throw in immense amounts of money on top of that, you are only going to aggravate this thing that is wrong with us, that prevents us from leaning into love on a consistent basis. So I think this is what we're dealing with here. It's something that she's not explicitly pointing out, but I think it's ever present in this book. Oops. But yeah, so great that this is in the first chapter, because it really does set a tone for what we're about to see here. I guess I could go next, going into the new master and the mistress.
Chapter 2.
Chapter 2.
All right. How deep in are you?
The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th paragraph. So it's going to be on the first page of that paragraph, or maybe into the second, depending on your publication. But I have been there for nearly a year, right? So,
and this is there with
the Flints,
right?
So she gets sold to the Flints and
bequeathed to the daughter.
To the daughter, yeah. 5 years old. I mean, this is just the insanity of the system. You have a 5-year-old who owns somebody that's twice her age, right? So I have been nearly there a year when a dear little friend of mine was buried. I heard her mother sob as the cods fell on the coffin of her only child and turned away from the grave. feeling thankful that I still had something left to love, I met my grandmother, who said, "Come with me, Linda." And from her tone, I knew that something had happened. She led me apart from the people and then said, "My child, your father is dead." Dead? How could I believe it? He had died so suddenly. I had not even heard that he was sick. I went home with my grandmother. My heart rebelled against God, who had taken from me my mother, father, mistress, and friend. The good grandmother tried to comfort me. "Who knows the ways of God?" says she. "Perhaps they have been kindly taken from the evil days to come." Right. And so here we're going to have two different approaches to Christianity here. One, Linda Brent, Harriet Jacobs, who will challenge God throughout this book. Like, how, if you are love, how are you allowing this to happen? Where you have the grandmother who views God through the lens of providence, right? We don't know God's way. It's all there for a reason. And she does try to provide some reason here, probably, thank goodness they are dead, right? Because who knows what horrors would come to them if they weren't. So I thought that's a very instructive thing to take note of for students that are grappling, maybe writing a paper on this, to look at these two characters, grandmother and Linda, approaching God in very different ways. Linda, who I think is deeply, they're both, I'm sure, committed to this concept of love, but I would say Linda is so committed to the concept of love that when she sees it not forthcoming from God, she's going to say, "What is this about?"
Yeah. Or she sees its rampant absence, if not opposite, so prevalent in the world. But WTF, God?
Yeah.
I thought you're love. I thought you're everywhere. Are you paying attention to any of this?
Mm-hmm.
And the grandmother is tending in the direction of sort of waxing theological about this. "Oh, don't worry. God's in his throne. All's well with the world. You just can't see how that is."
Yeah.
And Harriet doesn't see how that is. Like, what? No.
That's my dad. What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. It's a difficult situation for anyone to be, so I'll give some grace to grandmother. It's very difficult to be with someone in grief. And
Well, and she ends it the way that God finally addresses Job, in that story of
yeah,
unreasonable, irrational suffering.
mm-hmm.
God, why is all this crap happening? Where were you when I created the universe?
Yeah.
What do you know about anything? It's a question.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the grandmother's version of that is, who knows the ways of God? And you can read that sort of rhetorically, like, stop asking questions, or honestly, I don't get it either. Who knows?
Yeah, and no better event to really bring that to the
The
forefront.
death of a loved one.
It doesn't make sense after that. Nothing makes sense. And grieving is important. Yeah. Excellent. So what do you got next?
All right, sort of an interesting counterpoint to that one.
Okay.
Get up in my book, we're at pages 50 to 51.
Ooh, jumping ahead.
I guess it's going to be in Sketches of Neighboring Slaveholders, chapter 9. This is on towards the end of chapter 9, maybe counting from the back, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe about 10 paragraphs up. I could tell of more slaveholders as cruel as those, because that's what the bulk of the beginning chapter is. It's like, here's a bunch of examples of how crappy slaveholders can be, like truly cruel.
Mm-hmm.
Then you get to this point where it says, I could tell more of slaveholders as cruel as those I have described. They are not exceptions to the general rule.
Mm.
Like, there's plenty of them out there to talk about. I do not say there are no humane slaveholders, but I think she's very careful in her language throughout this. Such characters do exist, notwithstanding the hardening influences around them. But they are, like angels' vistas, few and far between. So we get an example of this. I knew a young lady, and so this is another mistress. So there's a nice kind of parallelism here that may or may not be intentional on the author's part. We get one version of a mistress, here's another version of a mistress.
Okay.
I knew a young lady who was one of those rare specimens. She was an orphan and inherited as slaves a woman and her 6 children. Their father was a free man. They had a comfortable home of their own, parents and children living together. The mother and eldest daughter served their mistress during the day and at night returned to their dwelling, which was on the premises. The young lady was very pious, and there was some reality in her religion. She taught her slaves to lead pure lives and wished them to enjoy the fruit of their own industry. Her religion was not a garb put on for Sunday and laid aside till Sunday returned again, i.e., it's not hypocrisy. Skip down a few pages after some terrible things happened. She had a second child by her master, and then he sold her and his offspring to his brother. She bore 2 children to the brother and was sold again. The next sister went crazy. The life she was compelled to leave drove her mad. The third one became the mother of 5 daughters. Before the birth of the fourth, the pious mistress, who we've been talking about, died. To the last, she rendered every kindness to the slaves that her unfortunate circumstances permitted. So you get this kind of sociological qualification of all of this, that she is as essentially as Christian and as pious as her circumstances would allow her to be. I think we get kind of this nod back to the first mistress that, in a sense, if you don't take the snarky reading, preaching neighbor love but not seeing me as a neighbor, that's not so much hypocrisy as it is, maybe that's as far as that poor first mistress's circumstances allowed her to envision the scope of love. I think we get that spelled out more clearly here. Like, yes. Here was one of these humane slaveholders. She was a super person. Her religion was real. She was truly pious to an extent, to the extent possible for her.
And here we're dealing, I think, with what I find very valuable about this book, because those limits, what that's pointing to is the system in which they live in, right? There's only so much one who is intended to be a good person can do under these circumstances. And we're not just talking about monetary issues like money, we're also talking about social norms. It would make them look bad if they freed their slaves. Like, what are you trying to do here? Are you an abolitionist? Are you one of these damn Yankees that doesn't understand what we got going down here? And the whole thing is predicated on the obvious white supremacy, the literal understanding that something about this epidermis gives us biological superiority towards other people. And therefore, we have these inferior beings around us, and we can be as cruel and brutal to them as we need to. Not only the market demands that, but within the context of this culture, it also demands that.
So, and yet, every so often we get these, where they call one of the angels visits, few and far between, like a slaveholder who actually doesn't go in for that kind of thing for whatever reason. They're nice.
Yeah, to a limit.
So far as that's possible, especially, if you're the woman in a slave owning family.
Yeah, that's a definite limit.
There's much less you are permitted and able to do.
Yeah. That's a good segue to the passage. I want to take us back to chapter 2, because we definitely get to the limit of women at this time, even those with immense wealth, right? Mrs. Flint. So chapter 2, let's see, about 1, 2, 3, 4 pages in on my book. This is page 16 or page 15.
All right.
And so, so Mrs. Flint, like many Southern women, this is where I see the snarkiness in her, was totally deficient in energy.
It's her matter-of-fact style.
Yeah.
It really,
I mean, it's beyond just calling her lazy. It's like she's deficient in energy, right? She had not the strength to superintend her husband's affairs, but her nerves were so strong. Again, right, that she could sit in her easy chair and see a woman whipped. Then we get to something real serious here, right? Till the blood trickled down from every stroke of the lash. She was a member of the church, but partaking of the Lord's Supper did not seem to put her in a Christian frame of mind. If dinner, right, and I love how she brings in sort of this theology, right? Isn't this supposed to put you in a certain frame of mind? right? And then, okay, what does this look like when you're not in the frame of mind? So here we go. If dinner was not served at the exact time on that particular Sunday, she would station herself in the kitchen and wait till it was dished, and then spit in all the kettles and pans that had been used for cooking. She did this to prevent the cook and her children from ecking out their meager fare with the remains of the gravy and other scrapings. The slaves could get nothing to eat except what she chose to give them. Provisions were weighed out by the pound and ounce 3 times a day, and she had nothing else to do. I can assure you, she gave me no chance to eat wheat bread from her flour barrel. She knew how many biscuits a quart of flour would make and exactly what size they ought to be.
No, this is a powerful one.
Mhm.
And I think you're right to sort of highlight and pause when you did. Because again, you get that, you read it as really that wicked sense of humor. She's a member of the church, but partaking of the Lord's Supper did not seem to put her in a Christian frame of mind. I mean, that could be some deep sarcasm. But then she immediately launches into the example, which I would suggest is entirely relevant because, Christianity for Dummies, Christianity 101, love the neighbor as yourself, help those less fortunate, and the commandments to feed the hungry, give water to the thirsty, nurse the sick, etc. And the first is, if you see somebody hungry, you give them food. If it's your food, you give them your food. If somebody asks from you, you don't deny them. So not only is she not in a particularly Christian frame of mind, the example that Harriet goes on to describe sort of suggests she's in the exact opposite frame of mind. Christianity teaches you give food to those who are hungry, but this woman who has, and this is Sunday night, so this woman who has earlier partaken of
just a few hours ago,
the Lord's Supper, consubstantiating with Christ, becoming more Christ-like. When she gets home that evening, she would not only not give food to those who are hungry, food to those who would ask for it, but she would effectively take food from them. She's not only failing to live up to the precepts of Christianity, she's, in that example, she's working in exactly the opposite direction, precisely in the opposite direction.
Yeah,
on purpose. You're hungry? Screw you.
Yeah, and spit in the food to make it, disgusting. As a disgust, she's basically manifesting the disgust that is within her. And to get to, I think, another point in this passage, we're, piggybacking on what you mentioned, the limits. This is a woman, yes, she has a lot of wealth. Her husband, very powerful individual, relatively, as we'll find out, actually, he's not so powerful when Mr. Sands gets in the picture. But she has really no choice but to be embittered, right? We've got a, is that, okay, I was just, sorry, Simon, I was just looking up there. Her agency is very limited. They don't have any children, but just to bring up what women were faced with during this time, you bring any property to the marriage, it immediately becomes your husband. If you have children, those are your husbands. So if this marriage, for some crazy reason, in the context of this time, was dissolved, you were liable to be without a home and denied your children, right? And so this is something that would probably weigh on any person's mind, women specifically, during this time period of, I have very limited power. And when we feel disempowered, we are going to externalize that trauma of feeling disempowered onto people with less power than us. The adage, hurt people hurt people. And so this is what this is the limits in what we're dealing with. And this is what Harriet Jacobs is faced with. And a lot of what the cruelty that is almost, I would say 100% of the cruelty inflicted on her is coming from people who are disempowered. Both men and women are feeling this disempowerment. This frenzy for wealth is inherently disempowering, because it's never enough.
But the way that society is constructed for them in that moment, there's a pretty obvious gimme in terms of what can I exercise power over? Where can I exercise power?
Yeah.
Oh, her.
Yeah. and such profoundly, and this is not even the half of Mrs. Flynn. She is a profoundly disgusting person. We can conclude this chapter here. Okay, yeah, this is where it gets really terrible. So the end of this chapter, chapter 2, towards the latter paragraphs here, from others, then the master's persecution also comes in such cases. I once saw a young slave girl dying soon after birth of a child nearly white, right? And this is dealing with sexual assault, which is systematic throughout the slave society. When you have power over the people you own, we can only imagine what is happening. And Harriet Jacobs makes that known throughout this text. In her agony, she cried out, "Oh Lord, come and take me." Her mistress stood by and mocked at her like an incarnate fiend. "You suffer, do you?" she exclaimed. "I'm glad of it. You deserve it all and more too." It's like a child. It's like a 6-year-old almost. The girl's mother said, "The baby is dead. Thank God. I hope my poor child will soon be in heaven too." This basically points to the horror of this, how you wish your grandchild and your child to death on them to alleviate their suffering. Really gives us an idea of how bad things are. "Heaven," retorted the mistress, "there is no such place for the like of her and her bastard," right? So we're dealing with somebody who was very embittered. Bastard meaning that there's no father involved, right? This illegitimate child, and most certainly is the master of the plantation. The poor mother turned away, sobbing. Her dying daughter called her feebly, and she bent over her. I heard her say, "Don't grieve so, mother. God knows all about it, and he will have mercy upon me." Her suffering afterwards became so intense that her mistress felt unable to stay. But when she left the room, the scornful smile was still on her lips. 7 children called her mother. The poor Black woman had but one child whose eyes saw closing in death, while she thanked God for taking her away from the greater bitterness of life.
It's rough.
Yeah.
And I think the easy move here, and maybe not entirely inappropriate, is to just recognize there's an obvious villain. Right? I mean, this is
with the mustache and everything.
Yeah, this is like a PG-13 R-rated Disney villain.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something sort of spiritually sick about the entire situation. It seems the vitriol is directed to the mother of the quote unquote bastard child because it's a bastard child. I think there's a more reasonable place to direct culpability and blame in that particular situation, the father of the child.
Yeah.
But that's not an option that occurs to anyone.
It's not an option.
Yeah.
What is she going to do? Confront her husband?
Yeah, and maybe for that reason,
yeah,
psychologically, it doesn't register as an option.
Cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. So there's a kind of spiritual disorder here that is finding this outlet.
Yeah. And real quick, we've used this concept, cognitive dissonance, a couple of times. So for someone who's not familiar with the concept, you have a brief explanation of what's being said here, because it's riddled throughout this text.
Yeah, my degree's not in psychology, so can I phone a friend?
Sure.
Yeah, but it's this idea of holding in your mind, 2 thoughts, one that you claim to believe and another that you're obviously acting upon, and not realizing that you're a divided self. Your mind is a divided mind. The way you're behaving and the way you're speaking don't match up in any reasonable way. Somebody looking on can say, there's some dissonance there between the one and the other.
Yeah, very easy to see from the outside,
Right.
But within the confines of your mind, very difficult, especially if you're acting on your material interests on a consistent way.
Right.
You'll make any excuse to suppress and to carry on. It's a survival technique.
Yeah, and come to think of it, this is sort of parallel to what Kierkegaard's definition for despair would be. It's a self that is in a misrelationship with itself. It's trying to, without getting too far down that road, it's a self that's trying to be self-constituting. The ego that is not only the making a mark on the world, but the ego that is literally the author of its own self. I'm me and I make me me.
Yeah, I'm in control.
Yeah. And for anybody who knows anything about human beings and the world and control, that's cognitive dissonance, to think you're in control of anything.
Yes.
But the more you persist in that, the crazier and more spiritually diseased you are. And eventually, these kind of outlets will be found.
Yeah, well, that's very profound. And yeah, any student struggling with this book, really focus on cognitive dissonance. It is really the theme of this book. The whole thing is people at war with themselves.
I would propose even more so than hypocrisy. I think, hypocrisy would be,
and
Kierkegaard's preferred target.
Mm-hmm.
But in this context, I'm coming more and more to think something like, a real spiritual state of dissonance is what's being diagnosed over and over and over again. These are selves that are not right with themselves.
Mm-hmm. They're at war with themselves, which is, I mean, the profound irony in this is on the surface, it looks like they've got it made, right? They're wealthy, they're powerful,
they're the winners. They're the winners in the story, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's you look at the rich and famous splattered throughout media. If God came down and said, I will give you, and I am very earnest about this, I will give you all the wealth and power that you need, I would deny that. Because what happens, and what I think is why people are at war with themselves, is once you reach a certain level of wealth and power, it becomes very difficult to trust anybody. Everybody wants something from you. And then you have the ability of discounting people, of getting rid of them, right? If your wife is giving you grief about this or that, not picking up your underwear and your socks, right? I don't need this in my life. I literally don't need this. Go away, right? And then you're that classic, Citizen Kane character, right? Just, or the Great Gatsby character, right? This common theme throughout great literature of the powerful who is isolated and it is at war with themselves, unable to make connections, to be vulnerable with people, which is the ingredients of love in itself.
Yeah, it's openness is how I'm fond of characterizing it. There's being open and there's being closed off. The more closed off you are, the more closed off you need to be, and that's there's a trajectory there, and it's not sustainable.
Yeah, right. And this is like if you see people, in the '60s we saw this, with the Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, later on Kurt Cobain, and even in Kurt Cobain's journal, he points this out of I'm still left with me. I rose from poverty, and indeed he did. This kind of lost kid, product of divorce in suburbia America in a working class neighborhood. And I've accomplished everything and I'm still left with me. Where's my shotgun? Let me eat it. Right. And that's, it's a universal theme, and it's something that definitely, to bring in some marks, it's what perpetuates history, right? Class conflict. You can really, if you really bore down in this concept of class conflict, what we're dealing with is disempowered people. I'm talking about the wealthy, disempowered from themselves, disempowered from lack of connection, who are going to internalize the trauma that they induced on themselves by being closed onto other people that are less materially powerful than them.
It's kind of a tragic cul-de-sac to get caught in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, what else do we got?
Let's take another one.
Take another one.
All right. I know I promised mostly minor characters, but because he is, I want to claim in all the types of quote unquote Christians throughout the book, I want to say grandmother is one anomaly. You've sort of gestured to why, and I'll get to her last.
Okay.
But I think Dr. Flint is the other anomaly.
Mm-hmm.
That you can't really easily label him somebody who doesn't understand Christianity and therefore can't put it into practice, somebody who understands it, doesn't want to put it into practice, or even an outright hypocrite. But he's his own type. and it's sort of, I mean, he's the obvious villain in this story.
Yeah.
Right? But there's something, again, I'm amazed at how subtle Harriet can be sometimes in writing. So this is the end of page or chapter 13, the church and slavery.
Oh,
Which,
yeah,
I can mine this chapter
this is
forever.
a very rich chapter.
And I like it because all the stuff that, theoretically I'm sort of drawn to is the first like 90% of the chapter. That's all, doctors of divinity this and churchmen that, and people from the north this other thing. And then her closing example is, oh yeah, this Dr. Flint guy.
So it's towards the end of the
So
chapter.
yeah, this is last page for me, but this is sort of her summing up.
Okay.
There's a great difference between Christianity and religion at the South. And if a man goes to the communion table and pays money into the treasury of the church, no matter if it be the price of blood, he is called religious. If a pastor has offspring by a woman not his wife, the church dismiss him if she is a white woman. But if she is colored, it does not hinder his continuing to be their good shepherd. All right, so there's the hypocrisy on display. Dr. Flint takes it to another level. When I was told that Dr. Flint had joined the Episcopal Church, I was much surprised. I supposed that religion had a purifying effect on the character of men. I mean, you give it the snarky reading if you want. And I suppose that religion had a purifying effect.
But yeah, could be read as sincere. Like I thought this would be the case.
Yeah, just like I
How
thought with
could you-
Mrs. Flint, she was just participating in the Eucharist and comes out Antichrist. I don't get it. Yeah,
What's wrong with you people?
I suppose that religion had a purifying effect on the character of men. But the worst persecutions I endured from him were after he was a communicant, after he joined the church. The conversation of the doctor the day after he had been confirmed, it's like, I've just joined the church, just been through confirmation, saved by the blood of the Lamb. That very day certainly gave me no indication that he had, quote, renounced the devil and all his works. In answer to some of his usual talk, I reminded him that he had just joined the church. Yes, Linda, said he, it was proper for me to do so. I'm getting in years and my position in society requires it. And it puts an end to all the damn slang. You would do well to join the church too, Linda. There are sinners enough in it already, rejoined I. If I could be allowed to live like a Christian, I should be glad. Well, you can do what I require. And if you are faithful to me, faithful, yes.
Yeah.
If you are faithful to me, you will be just as virtuous as my wife, he replied. I answered that the Bible didn't say so. His voice became hoarse with rage. How dare you preach to me about your infernal Bible? Now, notice the use of the second person possessive.
Yeah.
It's your infernal Bible. What right have you, who are my Negro, to talk to me about what you would like and what you wouldn't like? I am your master and you shall obey me. No wonder the slaves sing. Old Satan's church is here below. Up to God's free church, I hope to go. And that's a refrain I recall to some of her, descriptions of what the slaves were like if left to their own resources in church. They like nothing better than to sing songs and pray themselves hoarse. And over and over again, the songs sort of involved this refrain and tension of, yeah, this is Satan's church here, and the Lord's church, Jesus' church, is up in heaven. Pray to deliver us from this one so we can get to that one.
Satan's church being earth, basically.
Yeah, which apparently Dr. Flint is now a member of. But I mean, it's just the answer from him is so next level villainous. Within the context of, if you buy into Christianity, there's something worthwhile there. Hypocrisy is bad. Being ignorant of it is one thing. Being hypocritical about it is another. I think this is another level. So you just joined the church, right? Yeah, it was proper for me to do so.
Yeah. Checking boxes.
Of course I joined the church. I'm getting old and I have a position in society that requires me I got to get that badge. I got to get the Christianity badge. And it puts an end to all the damn slang. Presumably, I mean, if you want to take a stab at this, presumably the slang, which is, never see Dr. Flint at church. What's wrong with him?
Oh, the gossip. Yeah.
So look, I'm old. I have a certain status in society that requires me to be a member of a church. People will stop giving me grief over this. And by the way, you do well to join it too. You do well to join it too.
How gracious of them.
Given the fact that she's not on in years, she doesn't have that station in life and is not dealing with any version of the kind of slang he's dealing with. So what he means by this, he seems so completely disconnected from anything remotely Christian that hypocrisy is not the right word for this. Which is why this is one of the passages I wanted to highlight. This is another way of being a Christian in the world. that is not even paying lip service to anything remotely construable as Christian.
It's an avenue for power, right? I check the boxes. Now people are going to look at me differently, and that's going to help me out. Again, aggrandizing the ego, always, 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 right? Which is what is going to is the core ingredients of what is going to put someone at war with themselves on a consistent basis when they happen to interact with other people, especially those less fortunate than them. I love her response there. There are sinners enough in it already, I rejoined I, which is, one, Christian doctrine. I'm a sinner. What good is it going to help me, right? I'm lost. But she's also
That's not what she's getting at.
Yeah, she's pointing the finger right at him. If I could be allowed to live like a Christian, I should be. Wow, right? That is unbelievable bravery right there.
It's kind of bold.
Because pointing out the obvious, he could kill her right on the spot, and maybe even far worse.
Well, and if the tone, if you can infer the tone, his response, he isn't enraged yet.
Mm-hmm.
Although if he was clever enough to see what she was saying, he'd be mighty pissed at this.
Yeah, he probably doesn't even get it.
You dumbass! You're a sinner in the church of sinners enough there already. I don't want that. If I could actually live like a Christian, that'd be cool. Hey, you can. Yeah, no. And his response is, no. You can do what I require, and if you are faithful to me, you will be as virtuous as my wife. So he's got this figured out as well.
Yeah.
He doesn't realize he's being insulted, but now he's giving her advice. I figured out what I need to do in my life. I need to join the church, and I know what you need to do as well. Just do what I require.
He's the patriarch.
Everything's fine. Mm-hmm. But then when she says, "Yeah, no, that's not what the Bible says," then he gets enraged.
Yeah, because
So I've got something to make of that. But you want to take a stab?
Well, one, I'd like just to point out that this is a God complex, right? This is somebody who is taken on the role of God.
I think we're in the same neighborhood.
And you have these underlings, God, if you think of God and us, like what the mystery of God, he has taken on that role, and his enslaved people that he owns are basically the equivalent of human beings to God. And of course,
they're his people.
Yeah, you will do what I require, right? And so he's got it all figured out. And this is insanity. And really, it gets us to the bedrock of the virtue of democracy. The virtue of democracy, if we can really spread out here in this conversation, is that nobody has it figured out. We are flying blind here, but everybody's got a piece of the puzzle. And so let the demos, the voice of the people be heard, because we have this perpetual cognitive dissonance going on in people's heads, people at war with each other, especially the wealthy, especially the powerful, because they have the opportunity to put themselves in that situation more so than somebody who is disempowered materially, like Linda Brent. So this is a very powerful passage here. We see her boldness. We see somebody clearly who gets what I think Jesus was getting at all the while. And we also see somebody who does not have a clue.
Yeah. So why is he so pissed when she defers to the Bible?
I think it kind of sunk into his head that, oh, she's pulling a power play on me.
She recognizes another authority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Right.
How dare you worship a false god, your infernal Bible.
Mm. Right. Yeah. Scary stuff here. And incidentally, Jesus is actually in the Gospels always pointing out hypocrites, the Pharisees, right? Hypocrites, see these people praying, right? What do you think he would be if he was magically to appear in this room witnessing this, would say about Dr. Flint? If we can get into Jesus's head.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the two typical kind of responses where he would try and appeal to the latent humanity in the man.
Mm.
Or, you might get the Jesus of clearing the temple.
Kicking some tables over.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we have some chat up there, Simon? Okay. Would you mind just maybe reading the first one, if there's any questions or any comments?
One was a comment that said, this reminds me of the scripture where Jesus was asked, when did we see you asking for food? And he responds, if you did it unto the least of. And the tag to that was regarding the Pharisees and Sadducees, outwardly religious, but no God feeling.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly the passage I have in mind. That and Jesus is saying that in response to the question, how should we serve you? How can we be Christians? What does it mean to follow the way? And he launches into this. You see somebody, I've reserved a space for you in heaven because you saw me when I was hungry and you fed me. You saw me when I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. You saw me when I was sick and you tended to me. And they're confused, like, I just met you. I never helped you at all. And he corrects them, no, you did anything for anybody less than you. You did it for me. So that already, even you ask Jesus what it means to be a Christian, and you're getting something that's kind of at least philosophically complicated. How do you serve Jesus? You serve the least among you. And then he immediately turns to the other group and says, I've got a bad place prepared for you because you saw me hungry and didn't do crap, and you saw me thirsty and spat on me. I was in prison, you didn't come visit me, you never took care of me. And everybody's freaking out like, no, we never did any of that stuff to you. He's like, yeah, you did that to anybody, you did that to me.
And the final comment tied into what you were speaking of recognizing another higher authority or another authority. The comment was, this is Dr. Flint's alternate reality. Faithful to him, puts himself above.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That gets right to the point.
Yeah. Which, I mean, I think, and he's the obvious villain, but useful as an archetype, that this is a potential way of being in the world for human beings. Dr. Flint's not special.
No.
He has succumbed to this on a kind of grand scale, but he's not a different species from the rest of us. He's just a more glaring example of one way this spiritual warfare can play itself out in a person. An extraordinary example.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Were any other questions? That was it. Okay. Yeah, certainly. Yeah, for the students out there, anybody, please interrupt us in the chat, and we'll try to address them as we're going through this. Let's look at Scenes at the Plantation, page 79 in my book. It's about chapter 16. About 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a longer chapter, so about 5 pages in.
One of the longer ones.
Mhm.
All right.
So we have starting at the graveyard. She's visiting her.
Right.
Wait, am I in the right spot here? For more than 10 years, I forget the black stone bearing his grave. Okay, well, if it isn't, I'm sure there's something to comment on here, but let's begin here. The graveyard was in the woods and twilight was coming on. Nothing broke the death like stillness except the occasional twitter of a bird. My spirit was overawed by the solemnity of the scene. For more than 10 years, I had frequented the spot, but never had it seemed to me so sacred as now. A black stump at the head of my mother's grave was all that remained of a tree my father had planted. His grave was marked by a small wooden board bearing his name, the letters of which were nearly obliterated. I knelt down and kissed them and poured forth a prayer to God for guidance and support in the perilous step I was about to take. She's about to escape. As I passed the wreck of the old meeting house where before Nat Turner's time, the slaves had been allowed to meet for worship, I seemed to hear my father's voice come from it, bidding me not to tarry till I reached freedom or the grave. Yeah, give me freedom or death. I rushed on with renovated hopes. My trust in God had been strengthened by the prayer among the graves. So my first reading of this is we're dealing with a mystical experience. And so there's, one could kind of glance over this and saying that she's kind of in her head, she's grieving, she's very anxious, she's about to do something that could get her killed and could endanger her children. But I think we could also read this literally. She is empty of herself. She is at her lowest point. And keep in mind, she's willing to not necessarily abandon her children, but not to be in their presence for up to 7 years. And so this is no easy enterprise that she's about to engage in. But she basically indicates my trust in God had strengthened by the prayer among the graves. She's literally hearing the voice of her father, basically saying, go forth, man, go for broke. You're either going to get freedom or you're going to die. Either one is preferable to the situation you are in. So she's basically juicing herself up with this reservoir of love that she was fortunate to have. Getting back to the first chapter of this book, she didn't realize she was a slave until she was 6 years old, right? That is manifest of some very of not only loving parents, but very aware parents. They obviously shield the fact that she was an enslaved person. And she only finds out about it when her mother dies and her life is about to get upended. So yeah, I found that a very interesting thing, a very interesting passage to focus on. And I don't know, do you see any mysticism here?
You can read it that way. I mean, the easy reading is, of course, the first one that occurs to most people. Oh, this is a crazy lady.
Mhm.
She's driven crazy with grief, driven crazy about what she's contemplating doing. Never mind the solemnity, we can come back to that, but all that's left by mother's grave is a dead stump of what used to be a tree that I had fond memories of. All that's left of dad's grave is a name that's almost obliterated. This is, where is any of this going? It's all for naught. Yeah, so it's understandable that somebody could be driven crazy in circumstances like that. Start hearing voices.
Mhm.
But if you want to give this a spiritual read, yeah, there's a self-emptying here. She knelt down, kissed the graves, and poured forth a prayer to God, which I like that metaphor because it's an emptying.
Mhm.
And this is what somebody like Kierkegaard would say, this is the appropriate attitude at a grave. You're silent, you're receptive, you're open. You're not thinking of you, you're not talking about you. There is no I when you're at the grave.
Yeah.
You're empty of I, you're listening. And she prays to God for guidance. Stick with the spiritual reading. And what form does that guidance take? The voice of her father, which I don't think she means Father in heaven. I think she means her deceased father.
Mhm.
So I emptied myself. I prayed to God for guidance. And my father's voice came to me, which, and you could spin in some interesting theological ways. But yeah, there's a mystical thread here to follow if you have the eyes and ears for it. But I wouldn't so much think of this as her juicing herself up for what she's about to do as praying to be juiced up for it.
Yes, yeah. And that's the mystical.
The egotist among us will be here like, all right, get psyched up for what I'm about to do. Psych myself up, psych myself up. Come on. Yeah, but no, she is kneeling down, kissing the ground, emptying herself, like, please, anything.
Yeah, what strikes me is, I've had some hardships in my life, but I don't think I've ever been at this point in my life. I'm sure it's coming, TikTok, but this
challenge accepted, says the universe.
Yeah, right. It's coming, right? It ends poorly, terribly for everybody. But yeah, this is a moment that we're seeing of real desperation. Somebody who's not sure, who's digging deep in, emptying herself out, pouring forth to God. You are all I have to trust. She hears her father's voice. Yeah, this is a person where we could both probably thread the profane if this is just a crazy person who is stricken with grief and has just been stretched thin, to a real mystical thing of she is emptying herself. All she has is God. God gives her her father's guidance at this really delicate moment in her life.
Yeah, or at the very least, her father's guidance comes to her.
Mm-hmm.
And theologically, this connects with something we were talking about earlier, that I want to serve Jesus. How do I do that? By feeding that hungry person. Where am I going to see? Where am I going to hear God? Maybe the voice of my father. Where am I going to see Jesus? In the face of the stranger. So we pray for God to come. We pray for Jesus to be there. And I think very, very often we miss the fact that those prayers are answered, but it's just not God or Jesus that's showing up.
Yeah.
It's the stranger. It's the suffering one.
Well,
it's the deceased parent.
Yeah, you didn't give me food, you didn't give me water, that wasn't
that
you.
was me. No, that was me.
I'm in the face of all of you.
I was there.
Which is a very Hindu-esque way of looking at kind of spiritual awareness.
Well, also very Judaic. This is the face of the other, the face of the stranger.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's, when you see people of Hindu faith bowing, it's not just they're just doing that because they were taught to do that. They're literally seeing the God in you and going, I see you in there. You're a rascal, I know that, but deep down, God is there, right?
Which I think, and this is my only reluctance in giving an overly mystical read on Christianity, because I think it can swing in that direction too quick. That, oh, so when I'm looking at the stranger or the one suffering, what I'm really looking at is God, and that's why I should help the stranger. I think and it's probably the Judaic holdover in Christianity. They would want to say, hold on, no, you just swung the pendulum too far. You're supposed to help the one suffering because you recognize them as suffering.
Suffering.
This is a human being who's suffering. That's who you're supposed to be loving. Not so you can get your reward.
Yeah. Oh God, check mark.
Right.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
Got another sticker.
Not like I want to look at you so that I can see God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that seems to be a bridge too far.
Well, it's transactional.
Yeah.
I'm doing this because I'm getting
and then
my
you,
golden
the
stars.
stranger, the one in need, you're just sort of the currency that I'm using to get to the God who's behind you.
Yeah.
That seems to be a mistake.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. It reminds me of an old African proverb. Where's the best place to store your leftover food? In your neighbor's stomach.
Nice.
Yeah. All right. What do you got for us next?
I got another one.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So this is a little bit more upbeat.
Okay. Whoa.
Yeah.
Rare.
Well, she's left the South.
Okay.
She's up in Rochester at this point.
Okay.
Not entirely upbeat, but about as upbeat as you'll find.
Yeah.
So we're getting to, and this is when she's in Rochester with the posts.
Okay.
So probably, I don't know, chapter 39.
Ooh. Towards the end.
Yeah.
Okay.
And things aren't great in the North. We've got plenty of things to complain about up there. But and I don't know how much people listening know about Isaac and Amy Post, the sort of famous practitioners on the Underground Railroad. They helped kick off a lot of the anti-slavery movements, women's suffrage,
hardcore abolitionists.
Yeah, things are wrong with the world, and we're actually going to try and fix them.
Yeah, and to not to hijack what you're about to say here, but basically, these people are motivated by the Second Great Awakening. They're looking around. Oh, we got somebody on mic. Did you have a question? Okay, no problem. Yeah, the Second Great Awakening is this spiritual movement. It's a very emotional laden movement in its expression, right? This is where people are literally just falling on the ground and going into almost convulsions. You have very charismatic speakers who are able, it's probably what the Catholics during the Protestant Reformation were exactly worried about. It's you got these people who know how to spin a tale and are operating from the ego, me, and they're able to gather up these people. But what comes out of that is Jesus is coming any second, right? And when he comes, he's going to look around America and going, what are you guys doing? You got slavery, child labor, crime, immense poverty. Did you guys not read anything? Right? You all are going to hell.
Did you not get the memo?
Yeah. So this is what's motivating people like Amy Post, these people that are definitely immersed in the aftermath of the Second Great Awakening to go, we need to be prepared for the second coming of Jesus and make this truly a nation of God.
Okay.
And so that's what we're seeing in a lot, what's motivating people kind of in the background with these people. And do understand too, I think you were asking about Frederick Douglass, and hey, that rock star, Frederick Douglass, right. You ran into him, right? What we do need to understand, historically speaking, is this is a very small community of people. I want to make sure we dispel that the North was not a bastion of enlightened white people that looked at slavery and saying, this is wrong. We shouldn't be racist.
No, this is a very small, very extraordinary place.
Yeah. This is basically the Seattle of the grunge scene here, right? It's where it happened, and it was limited to a very small group of people. But yeah, please carry on.
So, yeah, no, and it's just the end of the chapter that I really wanted to highlight. That's this about the North, that about the North. We found warm anti-slavery friends there, but the feeling was not general enough to support such an establishment, despite what we in the South might have been told about the North. I passed nearly a year in the family of Isaac and Amy Post. As I guess was customary when you reached that stage on the Underground Railroad, this was their place.
Mm-hmm.
So she stayed there for a year. Practical believers in the Christian doctrine of human brotherhood. Practical. Yeah. It goes on to expand on it. They measured a man's worth by his character, not by his complexion. The memory of those beloved and honored friends will remain with me to my last hour. So we've got a couple of obvious heroes in the story here. Mm-hmm. But note the mode of praise. They were practical believers in the Christian doctrine of human brotherhood. And that's something that's not immediately obvious at the most basic level of Christian teaching. It doesn't take much to tease it out. But Harriet seems to be recognizing, yeah, these people, they took care of me. They treated me with respect. They gave me stuff when I was in need. They cared for me. That's what I understand the practical translation of Christian doctrine to look like, the way they treated me, as if we were all brothers.
Yeah.
We were all spiritual kin. And I think because, again, given our upbringing, to say they measured a man's worth by his character, not by his complexion, we're immediately put in mind of MLK's speech, right? They weren't privy to that speech. Mm-hmm. So this is sort of an epiphany apparently had by some white people that they would recognize human beings, regardless of their complexion, as spiritually family, mm-hmm. which was apparently not the norm.
No.
That you look different than me, you're obviously different kin, if not a different species. But the Posts, they actually recognized all of us as related and treated me accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at tremendous risk. These people are not popular, to say the least. They are risking their lives. The South, to be quite frank, they're a society of mad people. And the North is really no different in many ways. It's just not as egregious, although it does manifest its ways that Harriet is able to pick up on right away. She is treated differently, even by an African-American man who's basically someone servicing her, supposed to service her on the train that she's riding on. In one of these chapters, I'm not sure where it's at, but it's when she's first getting to the North. And it kind of blows her away. Like, this guy is perpetuating white supremacy, and does he not know who he is within the society? That's basically her attitude at that.
But again, I just love the way she highlights this idea. For her, this seems to be a given. And this is the closest she comes to actually spelling it out. Christian doctrine, whatever it is, really only is what it is when it's practiced. You can't have the doctrine by itself. That's good for nothing. It wants to be put into practice. Then you've got Christianity happening.
Okay. It's like a verb.
Yeah.
It's not a thing.
Being Christian.
Wow. Okay. Go Harriet. Yeah. Well, you have to go to hell to come to these realizations, though. So we have any more comments or questions?
There was one that tied into the part of the book where they were speaking of kneeling at the grave.
Mm-hmm.
This was the grave. That regard scene reminds me of Jesus at Gethsemane before his arrest and crucifixion.
You got any insight on that?
The quiet time before he's actually engaging with the disciples. Yeah, they're
okay.
Yeah, and I think, and you've alluded to this earlier, what is maybe the one thing that we can all agree we're terrified of and that puts us in our place? The thought of our own death, or more immediately what we actually get to experience, the death of a loved one. And if embraced honestly, that's the kind of thing that can really give you perspective on stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the appropriate spiritual attitude to take in times of crisis, is this radical quieting. Because honestly, how are you supposed to think about death?
Yeah, there's really no answers to it.
What would you like to think about it? You'll tie yourself in knots. So the appropriate response appears to be, stop thinking, be quiet, listen.
That's why I think it's a little, going back to the early passage after her father has died and her grandmother's really trying to comfort her, but basically advice is not needed at that point, right? Keep your insight to yourself. Probably the best advice to anybody when you're with somebody that you care about who's grieving is just to sit.
There's nothing to say.
Just be there. Keep your head down. Bring them food. Bring them water. Don't preach to them. Don't say it's for a greater purpose. Is that there's really nothing to make sense of it at that point. This person has been deeply attached to whoever this person is that they've lost. They've invested so much time, love, energy, and they're gone. Right? There's nothing that could be said at that point, just except, being Christian, just be there. Empty yourself out. Let's go back to chapter 10.
Oh no, she's not free anymore.
Nope, we're going back to some dark times here. And we get to somewhat of the target of her target audience. But I'll just go ahead and read. This is chapter 10 in my book, page 49. So this is third paragraph into this chapter. But oh, ye happy women, whose purity has been sheltered from childhood. Wow, yes. Who have been free to choose the objects of your affection, whose homes are protected by law. Do not judge the poor, desolate slave girl too severely. If slavery had been abolished, I also could have been married to the man of my choice. I could have had a home shielded by laws, and I should have been spared the painful task of confessing what I'm about to relate. But all my prospects have been blighted by slavery. I wanted to keep myself pure, and under the most adverse circumstances, I tried hard to preserve my self-respect. But I was struggling alone in the powerful grasp of the demon slavery, and the monsters proved too strong for me. I felt as if I was forsaken by God and man, as if all my efforts must be frustrated, and I became reckless in my despair. Whoa, there's a lot to unpack here. So she's about to explain to the reader what she did with Mr. Sands. She had two illegitimate children, and she's trying to basically say, listen, do not judge me.
Well, no, I mean, she's even there. You've got this sort of classic Harriet kind of humor about the way she introduces this.
Yeah.
It's, don't judge the poor, desolate slave girl too severely.
Yeah.
It's not get off your high horse and don't judge me at all.
Yeah, great point.
Don't judge us too severely because, and then she just slowly warms up the kettle to the point where you get to a fever boil in the next paragraph or two.
Yeah, the 1-2 punch is coming, right? One thing that can be said too is her target audience is women of means, of wealth, who could hobnob with senators and captains of industry. So she's playing basically, not so much a game here, but she doesn't want to offend anybody.
She has to slow walk them. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she can't lead off with the headline.
Yeah.
She's got to bury it because it would be too off-putting.
Yeah.
To have the reality just
they might
to you right off the bat.
React to her like Dr. Flint. Oh, you're preaching from your Bible, are you? Who do you think you are? Maybe even an abolitionist woman would have seen this as deeply offensive, because truth be told, we could probably surmise that Amy Post was a woman way ahead of her time and really did the personal work of emptying out white supremacy to the extent that she could. But many of these abolitionists are the very least paternal in their approach towards slavery, right? You poor things, but they still have that running script in their head that, these are kind of inferior people. right? But we still shouldn't be cruel to them. So I guess we give them credit for that. But yeah, this is an incredibly powerful passage here.
Well, and some people might ask, I mean, you can feel the mood darkening
Yeah,
if you're
Yeah.
accustomed to how she's reading. And when it comes to the end of the story, it's really just, okay, so I had an affair with a guy.
yeah,
And then I think one of the essays in the Norton Critical Edition does a great job of sort of highlighting how, you know, spirituality, Christian purity, and sexual purity were intricately interlaced. That they formed something of a real package deal, and trying to extricate the one from the other was all but impossible. So,
yeah.
and this is a kind
It's
of,
a tapestry.
yeah, so alleges the author that this is a part of the deep-seated suffering that she's undergoing. She's aspiring to this model of Christian purity, but because of the way that that is contextualized in terms of sexual purity, it seems to be, well, there's a foregone conclusion. I can't have that because I didn't have that.
Yeah,
And this is tormenting to her.
Yeah.
The way, you know, matters of the spirit and matters of, you know, sexuality have been, for whatever reason, yoked together.
yeah, and it's all screwed up. She's one of the things that we can put into historical context here is basically evolving out of Christian purity when it comes to sexuality. Within the midst of the Industrial Revolution, we have these ideas of separate spheres, women and men. And on the surface, they look very traditional, very patriarchal. But it is important to keep in mind that this is within the context of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, you know, people prior to the Industrial Revolution, not to paint like the good old days, but at this anxiety that we are experiencing currently is on steroids. The anxiety of what am I going to do with my life, right? It's why many of you watching this are here at this institution. You are not here because there's two nerds fawning over this very complex and disturbing book. You're here because you want to check a box. And nothing wrong with that, right? This is the way the whole thing is set up. But you're doing that out of anxiety. You know, maybe some of you aren't. Maybe I should take it back a little bit, but because you don't know what is in store for you 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 2 years from now, right? You've got to be on the go. So what I'm getting at with that is this begins during this time period, the sense of collective angst. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, how did you know what you were going to do with your life? What would you suspect?
Well, what did Dad do with
Yeah.
his life?
Yeah.
What did Grandpa do with his
Is he
life?
a carpenter?
What did great grandpa do with his life?
Yeah.
This is a trick question?
No, not at all, right? And so, and you know, in one sense, especially,
Well, in fact, if you were to ask me that question back then, I'd probably wonder about you.
yeah, like what are you asking?
What am I going to do with my life?
Are you insulting me?
What?
Yeah, not even insulting, would make no sense.
Yeah.
This is what I'm
Do with it?
yeah, define do. Yeah. So people, you know, from probably our context, that can sound tremendously unrewarding, boring, like just follow in the footsteps of your father. But imagine the security that you would have, right? I learned to build a house. I'm going to be able to have a family of my own and take care of them, right? And to actually be there for people and to live a Christian life. What the Industrial Revolution is doing slowly is it's taking away those attributes of profession from people, right? And so, you know, we have a little table here. No longer do you have to go to the person who makes tables and can custom make you one, you know, very expensive, but it will be something that will last you and your family to come. That is being slowly replaced by the machine, to evoke Pink Floyd here, right? Welcome to the machine. You've got these tremendous factories that are mass producing products. It's not like it is today. This is the burgeoning days of it, but it's beginning already to have an effect on people. And so what the separate spheres are all about is you've got the male sphere, the public sphere, which is politics, economics, power, right? And that is the place for the man, right? And what capitalism, what is being understood about capitalism at this point is it is corrupting the spiritual, the Christian culture, the essence of what it means to be Christian, because yes, there are going to be some days as a man that you're going to have to stab your neighbor in the back to make a buck and to provide for your family. So we are headed towards a demise in our society. But luckily, we got women at home, right?
Ah, that's right.
And women are, the Industrial Revolution is incredibly disempowering to women. Again, not to paint a good old days for women back then, but they had some degree of agency within the home. They were, they produced things in the home, right? They're spinning yarn to make the clothes for the entire family. They are tending to the animals to some extent, right? They're churning the butter for the cream, right? And so their power is limited, but they could be very subtle about that. And husband's giving you grief, he's not stepping up. Well, maybe I'm not gonna sew up your britches that have a hole in the butt, right? You know, maybe I'll be a little slow about that, right? And so there would be some room for negotiation in how the household would be going forward as a unit of a family. Well, that's being eroded by capitalism. And so what we are dealing with here of the role of women is they are our anchor to a Christian nation. And we should be very careful.
And that was sort of the understanding for a while, right? As we sort of were going through this intermediate stage of losing whatever it was that we were losing. Men lose it first, but then insist, okay, but at least the women are keeping virtue alive at home.
Mhm.
I can always retreat to there and maybe be forgiven for my sins out in the world that I had to do to make a living.
Yeah. And
I don't think that phase lasts very long in American history.
it lasted long enough, I think, until, I think it finally gets challenged in the 1950s, right? It's something which is not in the course of history events, it's not very long at all. But within the context of American history, this is the paradigm. And it's deeply empowering to women. Oh, I have a role in society, right? I am the anchor for virtue in this world.
Right.
And this is, I think, is what is playing in part to what Harriet Jacobs is struggling with, right? She hears about this. This is what a woman should be. You are here to provide virtue. You need to be pure, right? You cannot have children out of wedlock, right? It's not only damaging to you, but it's sort of a covenant with God. You are endangering the entire
home,
society.
the village.
Yeah, yeah. Telescope out. The whole thing is at stake here. Who do you think you are? Right. And so, yes, I am the anchor of the society. I hold this place to where it is. Very empowering. So this is what I believe she's in part struggling with. Is just basically the culture of what it means to be a woman during this time.
Well, and you've got echoes of that early venomous mistress, right? That you have a child out of wedlock, there's no place in heaven for you.
Yeah.
I mean, you've stopped being if you weren't already not a member of the family because the way you look, you have just stopped being a member of the family by virtue of your sexual escapades.
Yeah. And as she's pointing out, wasn't my choice, right? Especially for the woman that we're referring to earlier, right? The woman who's dying after childbirth, right? This woman was raped. We could argue, well, Harriet didn't really have to sleep with Mr. Sand and have illegitimate children, but she's thinking, how do I get out of here?
Yeah.
And this is, she's young too. A lot of this, you're almost, this book almost comes from high heaven, right? There's a lot of wisdom in this book, but we can easily lose sight that we're dealing with a teenage girl here.
And that's why, and again, I love the introduction. She is so witty and classy. Do not judge them too severely.
Yeah.
Because I think and she's already anticipating, there might be this kind of response. Well, you didn't really have to go off and be with this other guy. And then even in this white brain, there's a part of me that says, yeah, easy for us to say, right?
Yeah. A very powerful passage here that gets to the core of a lot of what she's dealing with, that both on the surface and kind of tucked under once you kind of scratch the surface of, well, what are people dealing with? And so these separate spheres are real instructive to understand when it comes to this passage.
Well, and there's probably a Christian message in this as well, that loving your neighbor, loving others as you love yourself. How about we try, I think this translates pretty directly, how about try extending the level of forgiveness to others that you extend to yourself.
Mhm.
Don't judge us too severely. By the way, are you judging yourself at all? It's kind of the mood I'm picking up here.
Yeah, and to get to the intent of this book, she's trying to hold up a mirror to Christian doctrine to Northern women, right? You claim you're Christian. You claim you have a sisterhood with women. And to give some more historical context, this is being written around the time that we're seeing the burgeoning women's rights movement, right? The year she escapes, or the year before she escapes, is the Seneca Falls Convention, where led by a woman named Elizabeth Cady Stanton, proposed the insane idea that if 50% of the population is subjected to taxes and law, well, perhaps they should have the right to vote in this country, right?
It's crazy talk.
And it indeed was thought of crazy talk at this time, even by women, right?
Sure.
She had to actually, it was Frederick Douglass who was present at the Seneca Falls Convention. When she proposed that, the crowd was in an uproar, because what they were worried about is, listen, we are here to get access to education, to the professions, to make sure that to access to divorce, and if we do divorce, we have a legal right to our children, we have property rights, and you're going to throw in the right to vote, Elizabeth? People are going to think we're crazy. And Elizabeth's retort to that is hilarious. It's like, they already think we're crazy. What are you talking about? And basically, Frederick Douglass is going to echo her sentiments, not the crazy part, but another point, the actual point that she makes is, how do you think we're going to get these things?
Right. I'm reminded of that great line, the exchange in, was it the trial of Chicago 8?
Mm.
You're about all these things, you're about all these things, you're about all these things.
So Vietnam.
And then last of all is getting the vote.
Yeah.
I realize if you don't get the vote, none of those other things matter.
Yeah, nobody's going to listen to you.
Yeah.
Right. Especially if you have all the stuff working against you. You're a woman, you don't have any wealth, right? At least the vote can create an aggregate of a voice of the people who are saying, yeah, we also need education, all of the stuff that we just went over there. But a lot. This is a book, just in this passage alone. This is what makes this a great book, because it is one of these things that in the course of your education, in the course of your life, this is a perennial book. You can come back to this book year after year, maybe every other year, and you are going to go, oh, I missed that. That's profound. It's one of those types of works of art, truly a work of art.
Well, and I like the honesty here. She's taking herself to a very dark place and admitting, at that point I feel abandoned by God.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, I became reckless in my despair.
Yes.
I've lost hope. I'm not forgiving myself. I'm not even offering apologies. This is just what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Without hope, I became reckless and did some stupid things.
Yeah, as any teenager does, right?
Yeah.
That's the perfect time for despair, right? You're confused. Especially in the context of her time.
All of you have done things as
Yeah.
a teenager. Have you forgiven yourself for that? Maybe you could extend a bit of that forgiveness towards people in my situation. Just, thinking as a Christian.
Yeah, I think I got a little off track on that anecdote there, but to get to the point of this book, she is holding up a mirror to these Northern women to say that, if you truly value Christianity, if you truly value sisterhood, you are going to see the plight that I'm in and the millions of other women that are in this plight. Please do what you can.
Yeah, and she's making a pretty direct and profound plea. I'm addressing you as a Christian. What does your Christianity look like in practice?
Mm.
And can that coexist with what I am showing you now?
And the answer plainly is no.
That's the question. And to her credit, I think she's asking that question, in an open-ended way throughout much of this book. Dear Christian woman, how do you account for this? Can you?
Yeah. Yeah, and again, she's playing right into the second great awakening anxiety. God is coming back and he ain't going to be happy. So here's something else to be unhappy about, right? Yeah. Any other questions or comments have come in? We're getting towards the end of our time period here.
There was a lengthy comment.
Okay.
I'm struck by her loneliness. Mm-hmm. There was no support system. She has no one to ask, what would you do in my situation? She wrote, but I was struggling alone. How many times have we felt alone in our own struggles, feeling like you have no one to turn to? And then the final thought is bringing it back to the topic of Christianity. Jesus said to the man accusing the adulteress, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone."
Perfect. Yeah, beautifully put.
Yeah.
Right.
And not that hard to understand when it's laid right out for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, she's definitely and this is an existential reality. We live our lives alone in profound aloneness, right? And so the only way to enrich it is through connection, but at the core of it is alone. You live alone, everything that you're exuberant about life is alone, trapped in your head. Your death is certainly profoundly a lonely experience. You can have all your loved ones around you, but it is you that is going through that experience.
Right. And I think, here's an avenue, we probably have to do a whole nother talk about this, but the opening for kind of a sincere ontology, that all of that is sort of wrapped up in the assumption of being a self-enclosed self. If you insist on being a self that is a self unto itself, and then relationships come second, you're always going to be alone.
Yeah.
Because you are the self first and fundamentally. And
Yeah.
relationships will always be secondary or tertiary and dissolvable. So the reorientation would have to amount to a reconceptualization of what's primary, what's fundamental. Is it me and you and then the relation between us? Or is this love, the relationship, fundamental? And that's what constitutes us as our true selves.
Like love is a separate thing.
Love is the real thing.
Yeah.
Love, the verb, is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it constitutes the agents of love.
Oh. Gives meaning to this. Yeah. Everything that you,
because if you start with the
yeah.
agent, even if you surround it with other agents, you will always be fundamentally and essentially alone.
Mm. Yeah, and the farther you go up the chain line, the more that aloneness will become acute.
The more you become, the more you there is, because you've aggrandized yourself with power, the more fundamentally alone you will be. It's not that hard to understand once it's all laid out for you.
Yeah, it really isn't. It's hard to put it in practice, though.
I'm not disputing that for a minute.
Yeah, I did this interesting exercise walking through the campus. It's exhausting, but you say it in your head, but everyone you encounter, you walk by them and you go, I love you. I love you. At least me, I was exhausted from going one building to the other, and I quickly abandoned it. But it was an exercise to stay present and to try to stay in that energy of love. And it really made me understand that this isn't a task to underestimate. If one is through, definitely not through will, but it just allows it to come in, prepared to be tired of it, exhausted from it. It's not easy to put into practice because everybody is at war with themselves. Some are less on that spectrum than others, but everybody is caught, especially in the context of our time in a capitalist, post-capitalist world that we live in, wondering how can I further aggrandize me? Yeah. Me. Do we have any last comments? We're getting towards the end of the talk, so we have what do we got? We still have 10 minutes, so please do interrupt us. You can open up your mic or you can get us on chat. But in the final 10 minutes, what's your overall takeaway of this text?
Well, I like the last passage of the book proper. You're sort of wrapping up the story and wrapping up her telling of the story. So it's meta in a way I kind of like. It has been painful to me in many ways to recall the dreary years I passed in bondage. I mean, it sucked being in bondage, but now she's saying it's even recalling those years is draining and exhausting and painful.
It's trauma.
I would gladly forget them if I could. Yet the retrospection is not altogether without solace, for with those gloomy recollections come tender memories of my good old grandmother, like light, fleecy clouds floating over a dark and troubled sea. And the connection with Christianity won't be too far to reach here, because it's her grandmother that I think first introduced to the ideal of Christianity, challenging and confusing as it might have been for a child. But she ends with her grandmother. She doesn't end
Yeah.
with, I thank God for this, praise Jesus for
Yeah,
that. And,
That's significant.
the Christians were good helpers and God bless them. It's no, the solace I have when looking back at this crappy life that is painful to even look back on is looking back also allows me to remember my grandmother, which is like light, fleecy clouds floating over a dark and troubled sea.
Yeah.
The dark and troubled sea, that's real, that's powerful, that's palpable. You don't mess around with that.
Contend
When
with
you're in it, you can't get out of it.
Mhm.
And the grandmother, the solace is light and fleecy. It's fleeting, it's insubstantial, but it's still somehow there.
The sun peeking through.
Yeah, and there's a kind of, this is a great metaphor if you wanted to spend time teasing it out. A metaphor for spirituality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The darkness is there and it's raging and it's terrible and you can drown in it. But if you have the right kind of eyes to see it, there's also this ethereal, barely visible, here now, gone the next, something that gives solace through it all.
And it maybe even gets.
Or maybe that's just crazy talk. You always have
No, I think it's yeah, she's a brilliant writer. Yeah, because she could have been very unspecific and just kind of an overall gratitude towards the dark days of her life. But she points to one person. And I think this gets practical.
in a way, she's not just I'm grateful for my grandmother because
Yeah.
I loved her so much. She's painting an image.
Yeah.
She can't quite articulate directly what she's experiencing in that recollection. So she reads for an artistic rendering.
Yeah,
There's something about this spiritual life that I can only paint for you.
it's ineffable.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that can't really be spoken about. To attempt, though, to give some maybe a practical thing that she's pointing out, it's
Probably
Yeah.
more than one way to read the book.
probably, yeah. Yeah, life is dark. There's troubled seas out there, but she's pointing to someone she had a deep connection with. And that gave her the ability to not only be connected with her grandmother, but connected.
Yes.
She kept that. And I look back at some of the unconscious days of my life as a young man, now in my wisdom, there are large pockets of my life where I have no memory of. Like I'll have old friends I'll run into. My wife will explain things to me and like, when did that happen? And if I dig a little deep, like, oh yeah. But it takes some effort, right? And then what I notice is that those pockets, it's not sort of like I'm suppressing memories or anything like that. It's just I was not connected. I was focusing on me, and you being very transactional with people. And the moments that are most salient to me, the ones that really have some juice to them, those were moments where I can go, I was really connected.
There was less you in the equation.
Yeah, exactly, right? I was deep in love, not just romantic love, but there was moments in my life where I was able to have these memories, and not just, bad memories, good memories, because I was connected.
Which, if you want to come full circle, this might be the recipe, and there seems to be something very Taoist about this as well. The recipe for somebody who can honestly say, I no longer have any fear of death.
Mm-hmm.
If someone is actually embracing this kind of fruitful, generative, loving, self-emptying, and selflessness,
What do you have to be afraid of?
what am I going to lose?
I don't have, it's not even there.
I'm gonna lose the one thing that if I embrace, I become lonely and miserable and desperate and stupid and evil and cruel.
Yeah.
Aw.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's a great way of closing this out. So thank you for your time. Thank you for the support through all of this project. I think
Well, thank you for inviting me to read this book with more careful eyes than I might have otherwise.
Yeah, and I think it's been beneficial to our students, everybody who's given these talks. I think there's been a lot of insight. And this is a book, if you're reading this book as a student, you're like, I think this is important. I had a student that showed me her book and it was all highlighted.
Start underlining the important stuff after once or twice through the whole book's underlined. Yeah, I'm getting there.
Yeah. And and that's a common thing that especially in your first couple of years as a student, but understand that, yeah, you're going to miss out a lot of what is being said here. That's natural because there's a lot being said here.
Well, and yeah, part of this is it's a political maneuver, right? She's trying to affect some change in the world. But I think more than that, especially because it's, it's a written piece of work, she's also trying to connect with the reader.
Mhm.
That there's
In direct ways.
a connection is
Says,
trying
"Hi, reader."
to be, foraged and acknowledged there as
Mhm.
well. So, another thing to do well to keep in mind when you're reading a book, if it's a well-written book, on the other side of it is an author who's actually trying to cultivate a connection with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's the connection that matters.
Mhm. Common theme throughout this book.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys very much. For those that were present, no last questions or insights, Simon?
I'm gonna put the sign-in sheet.
Oh, yeah, the sign-in sheet. Yeah, I almost forgot, which you guys probably would have let me.
God bless the sign-in sheet.
Yes, that is the whole point. Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, while that sign-in sheet's going out, one, let me know if you do have problems with it, just go ahead and put the requisite information in the chat. But the first go-to is the actual link there, so we can dig it up quite easily to send off to any teacher seeking your attendance. What's that?
Do I cut the recording?
Give it a couple of minutes. One, people are, I think, still signing in. And two, just in case there's a question or comment that we can address in these last few minutes here. But if not, yeah, cool. Thanks, man. We got something done today, I think. It's a good talk.
Feels all right.
I learned quite a bit, a little bit more. Always with these talks, I'm like, oh yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you have to acknowledge that there's a different set of eyes on this than yours.
Oh man, I thought it was all about me, right? Dang it.
Yeah.
Right.
But I mean,
It's me every time.
Yeah, but if we're real when we're doing this, we will both come away with a better sense for what's in this book than either one of us could by reading it as an eye.
Yeah, I think back in the day they did book reading clubs. Gathered around on a common text and read them together.
Yeah, and I don't think the idea was ever, okay, I've got my reading and I want to impress upon you its value.
Yeah.
And I'll return the favor by allowing you to try the same with me. I think the point was, all right, we've all put eyes on this. Let's see what emerges from the community of sharing that. And that will be the superior perspective or the superior experience.
Democracy at work. Yeah. Yeah, it really brings out the magic of reading, right? It's getting to the connection of the reader who's trying to have a conversation with you. And sometimes, if you're reading a book that you're struggling with, it's good to give a voice to that person, like an actual audible voice to it. Maybe even read it out loud in some sort of, you can come up with a Southern drawl, right? She is from North Carolina during the antebellum, after all. And then you can just bring that voice into your head as you're reading silently and taking notes. It's helpful because you will have a connection with this person who lived on this planet and endured things that she accounted for in these incidences.
Which is, I mean, interesting. That's sort of Kierkegaard's go-to rule for how to read scripture. When you're reading a book in the Bible, you have to read it as if it's a love letter written to you.
Oh.
It's not written about other people. It is written to you about you.
Connection. Yeah. Hey, Miss Cantu is out there.
Yeah, I've been here. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you have,
hello.
Like to share with us?
Well, I've been the one sharing the only one in the chat, still yakking.
Unfamiliar.
But the last thing I wrote was I write to understand as well as to be understood. Y'all know whose quote is that?
I've heard it before. Who is it?
Well, I don't. It's is it Eli Wiesel?
Oh, Wiesel. Oh,
the Holocaust survivor.
Yeah, who accounted a story escaping from Auschwitz.
Yes.
Or being run out of Auschwitz.
He wrote Night, right? And so I just kind of felt at the end when y'all were talking about the summarizing the book, I think that was a big part of Harriet Jacobs' writing, that she is like, she's understanding a lot of what happened to her. And I think it was like almost part of that, because now I think one other thing we could look at was like her mental health,
Yeah.
Especially when it was like, I felt so alone, how sad that must have been, that loneliness. And so I think that just her writing must have helped her out with a lot of the trauma. What do you all think?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, it must have been quite cathartic to go through this. Um, and what I was also thinking about her sanity, although there are definitely avenues to say, yes, she's losing her mind here and there, especially when she's actually in the garret. She's definitely hallucinating at certain points. The fact that she was able to maintain her sanity and endure life following her experience in the garret is remarkable. This was enough to drive any very strong individual who's done the work previously to drive them mad, right? The greatest punishment you could do to a prisoner is to put him in solitary confinement. It is literally the recipe of insanity, because you lose the conduit of time, right? A lot of how we're able to measure the events of the day is just through interactions. And so if you don't have that, how day bleeds into night, night into day, and there's just no meaning to anything. So yeah, very remarkable just to see that this was somebody definitely struggled, and understandably so, but was very cognitive of her thoughts, her experience, and maintained a tremendous amount of dignity, where I definitely probably would have lost my dignity long ago, given her experience, if I had to live it.
Right.
No, if I had to speculate, I would say probably less cathartic and more a sense of regaining a form of dignity.
Yeah.
Because even to the end, she's not terribly enthused about the kind of freedom she's acquired by having been bought for $300 and then set free.
Yeah.
Like that's somehow not real freedom.
That's
not the kind of freedom that God gave me. The book doesn't really have a happy ending. But I think if there's anything to where Martha has us headed with this, maybe rather than this being a cathartic experience, her actually being able to sit down and write the story.
Tell her own side of the story.
I
Give
mean,
voice to
never
it.
mind, especially as a woman, especially as a woman of color, especially as a woman of color who was formerly enslaved. I mean, that just makes it all the more remarkable that I would have to think at some point she has to look back and say, huh, this got created.
Yeah, yeah. The book itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, you know, anybody who's engaged in any writing process,
I say that about the crap I write.
Yeah, it takes almost everything from you, because it's especially if you know the purpose is for other readers, you are hyper aware of that, and so you want it to make sense. You want it to have a purpose, and so yes, it's a remarkable feat for anybody, especially somebody of her circumstances.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed the talk. I got on as fast as I
Thanks,
could.
Martha. I'll send out the recording probably sometime tomorrow. So we've
All
got
right.
the sign-in sheet. It doesn't look like anybody was complaining about that. So I think we're all good.
Finally figured out how the sign-in sheet works.
Yep, we finally figured it out. As well as everything. So probably more to come next year. We'll be looking at the text Heart of Darkness. I probably will do a few more talks on this between summer and fall, just to kind of dig in a little bit deeper, but this does conclude the common reading text, Incidents of the Life of the Slave Girl. I give my thanks to the committee for the selection of this book. Once again, keep it up. And I think the next book is going to be equally profound and something to work with. So more to come next year. Yeah, indeed.
Well, thanks again for this.
Cool. I think we're done. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks.